The phone rang late at night, breaking the heavy silence of the hotel room. Greg Harper had just returned from a grueling day at work, his body aching with fatigue, but the call made his heart clench with a sense of foreboding. He glanced at the display. Thomas, his son. There was an unpleasant feeling in my chest. An 18-year-old guy wouldn't call just like that, especially at such a time. Greg, hello? Volume? What's happened? His voice was tense. There was concern in it. Thomas. Dad, it seems our mother has gone crazy. The son's voice trembled. Muffled voices could be heard in the background, as if someone was arguing nearby. Greg. What? Greg straightened up sharply. Fatigue instantly disappeared, giving way to anxiety. Explain properly. Oliver. She disappears at night. Oliver entered the conversation, his voice sounding harsh and angry. A taxi brought her this morning. 8 in the morning, Dad, taxi. We don't even know where she was all night. Thomas. And then there's this strange woman. Thomas spoke more quietly, but there was fear in his voice. She says it's her old friend. But Dad, they're being terrible. They drink and laugh like teenagers. And Mom, she doesn't look like herself at all. Greg. His fingers clenched the phone until his knuckles turned white. Everything was thundering in my head. This can't be true. Catherine was his wife for 20 years. Faithful, caring, loving mother. I'll come on the first flight. His voice became hard, cold as steel. Don't tell her you called me. Just be careful. Thomas. Dad, hurry up. The son's voice sounded pleading. Before it gets worse. The call ended. Greg stared at the screen for another second, then jerked to his feet. Anger bubbled in his chest, and on top of it, a terrifying foreboding. His family was collapsing, and perhaps he was too late to save it. Greg Harper's life flowed smoothly and predictably for many years. Perhaps, from the outside, this life would seem too measured and boring to some, but Greg himself considered such stability a sign of well-being. He once dreamed of just such an existence, to get up in the morning without worries, to come home in the evening and know that your beloved wife and beloved children are waiting for you outside the door, to do routine work day after day, but bringing a stable income, and gradually provide your family with a level of comfort that once seemed almost unattainable. Greg was born in a suburb of Boston, in the family of a government employee and a primary school teacher. The family lived within their means, always carefully counting every penny spent, but a calm, warm atmosphere reigned in the house. Greg's parents were not rich. His father, Douglas Harper, did not have a high salary as an official, and his mother, Margaret, worked at a school and devoted all her free time to her 3 children. Greg was the middle of 3. He had an older sister, Charlotte, and a younger brother, Georgie. From an early age, Greg was distinguished by his perseverance, curiosity, and seriousness, which is why his classmates considered him a nerd. His favorite pastime was to unwind all sorts of devices and put them back together again. His father sometimes grumbled that Greg took apart and broke everything he could get his hands on, but noticing how skillfully his son repaired and improved everything, he was secretly proud of him. Quiet and friendly, Greg made more friends with books than with his peers. As a teenager, he didn't really go to parties, preferring to sit at home at the computer or read electronics magazines. But he liked to understand diagrams, drawings, and build mini models. Mother said, "Greg, you are amazing. You just need your world, where everything works according to the laws of logic." After finishing school with good grades, Greg entered engineering college. It was there that the chapter of his life began that led him to meeting Catherine and then to starting a family. He entered the Faculty of Engineering, choosing to specialize in the design and calculation of building structures. Greg's studies were easy. He loved exact sciences, and numbers and huge formulas seemed to him like a kind of poetry. At the same time, he worked part-time at the Student Research Center, where he repaired computers and helped with setting up various programs. And then one day, already in his 3rd year, his college friend invited him to attend an end-of-semester party. "Listen, Greg," said a friend, "stop sitting in the library. We should at least once take a walk, drink a soda, and see how the young people are having fun. Greg, as usual, initially refused, but in the end he decided to go, if only to take a break from the stressful exams. There, at this very party, he saw for the first time that girl who turned his whole worldview upside down. Catherine, or as she asked to be called, Katie, was an art student. Short, fragile, with light brown eyes and a lively, friendly smile, she immediately caught Greg's eye. And even though she had a friend next to her, the bright and sassy Jessica Lane, who loudly made sarcastic remarks about boring nerds, Greg still dared to talk to Katie. "Excuse me, can I have some lemonade too?" he asked, approaching the makeshift bar where the girls were pouring themselves drinks. Katie accidentally elbowed him while trying to move, her face flushed with slight embarrassment. "Oh, sorry, I didn't notice." Greg smiled and, despite his sarcastic friend Katie, began a conversation. Their conversation was timid at first, but Greg soon realized that it was not so difficult for him to talk to this sweet stranger who was interested in creativity, loved to draw, and wanted to become an interior designer. Jessica, of course, periodically threw barbs like, "Cat, he's a typical nerd, look at him." But Katie pulled her back. "Jess, that's enough. Don't be rude." Greg remembered this wonderful feeling as if he was protected, and at the same time given him a kind smile. This is how their acquaintance began. At the university, they began to see each other more often, went to lunch together. Greg walked Katie to the buildings of the Faculty of Arts, and she sometimes stopped by the auditorium of the engineering building, pretending to be looking for a friend there. Gradually, their warm friendship grew into a romance. Greg, with his somewhat old-fashioned views, turned out to be a very caring gentleman. Katie happily immersed herself in his attentiveness because he really appreciated her thoughts, her dreams, and each time he gently supported her in all her endeavors. And Jessica? Jessica was always at the center of any party, calling on Katie for an eternal holiday. But over time, Katie began to realize that she was tired of the eternal festivities and surprises. All this no longer seemed exciting to her. On the contrary, it deprived her of stability. And in Greg, she saw reliability, which gave peace and confidence in the future. She liked that he didn't judge anyone, that he always had a plan, that he knew how to remain firm, but at the same time soft in communication. And so, after graduating from college, Katie and Greg got married. The wedding was small, but touching. Katie's parents were at first skeptical about the wimpy engineer, but later Greg managed to prove to them that he was decent, kind, and capable of providing their daughter with a quiet life. Just a couple of years later, the couple had twins Thomas and Oliver. Katie threw herself into motherhood, putting aside her dream of becoming a designer, while Greg pursued a career in construction and engineering. The years passed calmly and reliably. The guys grew up, became more and more independent, and Greg tried to spend more time with his family. His wife seemed to be happy. A well-equipped home, a caring husband, two mischievous sons. Yes, sometimes life seemed a little predictable. But this is exactly what Katie once wanted: to get away from Jessica's noisy companies and be close to a person who truly loves her. And then the moment came when Thomas and Oliver reached the age of 18, and Greg was offered a lucrative contract in another state. It was necessary to go on a work trip for 3 months to monitor the progress of a large construction project. The money was promised to be good, and Greg was already looking ahead to his son's future. They would soon be entering college, which meant that expenses would increase. "Greg, this will take a long time," Katie said, sighing. "I don't want to be left without you, but I understand that it's beneficial." Greg promised that he would try to come on weekends as his schedule would allow. But the realities of the work turned out to be harsh. Deadlines were tight, force majeure arose, and Greg could not leave when he wanted. Video calls and telephone conversations gradually became less frequent. Either he would disappear in the evenings at meetings, or Katie would say that she was busy with household chores. And then that very late call came that radically changed everything. A call from sons who, in a panic, reported that something was wrong with their mother. "She disappears at night," Thomas said in a whisper. "Dad, come quickly." Oliver added, "Mom is acting like she doesn't care about us with some woman." and at one moment the family idol, which Greg considered strong, seemed to crack. And behind the crack, the unknown opened up, full of pain, resentment, and a bitter feeling of betrayal. Greg took the first flight to the airport. Greg grabbed his phone and quickly found his boss's number in his contacts. Michael Rivera. The man had been working with him for several years and knew how important the project they were currently working on was. But now there was no time for work. The phone rang, and a few seconds later a hoarse voice was heard on the receiver. Michael. Harper, do you even know what time it is? I hope you have a really good reason for this call. Greg. Mike, I'm sorry, but I have. Serious family circumstances. I urgently need to return home. Michael. Greg, you understand what the moment is now? We're in the final stages, and if you leave. Greg. Yes, I understand everything. Greg exhaled heavily, holding back the anger that rolled in. But this is not discussed. God knows what's going on at my house. I need to be there. There was silence on the other end of the line. Greg even heard Michael reach for a glass of water and take a few slow sips. You could hear the boss trying to digest what he had heard. Michael. Damn, there's something in your voice that I don't like. Something serious. Greg. More than that. I can't explain right now, but Mike, I really need to leave. For a long time. The chief paused again, then exhaled loudly, as if surrendering to the inevitable. Michael. Okay, Harper, we'll figure something out. But you will explain this to me later. Greg. Thank you, Mike. I am indebted to you. He hung up the call and immediately opened his laptop. His fingers trembled as he searched for tickets for the next flight to Chicago. All that was available was a morning flight, but he simply could not wait several hours. Greg refreshed the page over and over until the notification flashed. One seat available on an overnight flight. He didn't hesitate. He immediately completed the purchase without even looking at the price. Money didn't matter. He needed to go home. With shaking hands, he began to pack his things. Opening the suitcase, he didn't even look at what he was putting in. Shirts, jeans, a shaving kit, a charger, everything flew inside in a chaotic order. The main thing is speed. Greg nervously ran around the room, grabbing the necessary things, but the feeling that he was forgetting something did not leave him. His thoughts were far away in the house where something terrible was happening. The son's words thundered in my head, causing unbearable anxiety. Mom is no longer the same. She disappears at night. A taxi brings her. What the hell? It wasn't his wife. Not the Catherine he knew. Greg ran out of the hotel, throwing his keys at the front desk. The taxi was already waiting for him at the entrance. The car took off, rushing into the darkness of the night, and he looked out the window, clenching his jaw. Only one word pulsed in my chest. Quicker. Throughout the flight, Greg steadily rocked in his seat, looking out the window into the black night sky. A million questions were swirling in my head. What's going on? Is it really that serious? Katie never showed any attraction to any wild parties, but... The plane landed at about 7 in the morning. Greg, overcome by a strange feeling of anxiety, grabbed his luggage and ran towards the exit. It was early spring and the weather in Seattle was rainy, but Greg didn't even notice the drops on his windbreaker. He couldn't wait to get home. In the parking lot, he got into his car, which he left at the airport. The journey to the suburbs took a little less than an hour. The city streets were still half empty. Greg was trembling, either from excitement or from cold, because in his heart he still could not believe what he had heard from his sons. As he drove up to the house, he noticed someone else's car was parked in the driveway, a red convertible with tinted windows. Greg parked and got out of the car. At that moment, the door of their house opened and a woman appeared on the threshold. He immediately recognized her. Black hair, bright makeup, provocative clothes, Jessica Lane. The same one that blew up Katie's life in her youth and then sank into oblivion. Jessica. Oh, well, hello, Mr. Diligent Husband. How are you? Long time no see. 20 years, right? She didn't even try to act embarrassed. She looked at Greg as if he were an old acquaintance whom she was about to tease. Greg, Where is Katie? Jessica. Katie, she's at home. She said that she wanted to get some sleep, but you see, I'm already leaving. Come in, don't be shy. This is your home. Greg held his breath and walked past her into the house. He heard the click of her heels on the porch, then the slam of a car door. Jessica left, leaving him completely bewildered. Greg was met at the house by one of his sons, Oliver. Pale, with dark circles under his eyes, the guy looked like he hadn't slept for several nights in a row. Seeing his father, he rushed to him. Dad, you finally arrived. Mom is acting strange, to put it mildly. Greg squeezed his son's hand in a handshake and felt his heart clench in his chest. Is everything the guys said on the phone really true? Where is Thomas? He asked quickly. He has entrance tests this morning. He said that he couldn't miss it because all the deadlines were coming soon, Oliver replied. But he promised to return in the evening. And Mom? Greg almost couldn't say the word. He's asleep, Oliver smiled bitterly. Came in the morning. With Jessica. They were both drunk and loud, so much so that I woke up. Jessica left just an hour ago. You probably managed to catch her. Greg clenched his jaw, trying to control his anger. Drunk and noisy. Is this a joke? His wife, with whom he lived quietly and peacefully for 20 years, is now suddenly turning into a party girl. I'll go to her now, he muttered. But first, tell me everything you know. Oliver briefly outlined the picture of the last few weeks. Katie increasingly left in the evenings, declaring that she was going to a friend's house or to the cinema and returned only in the morning. Sometimes she smelled of alcohol and tobacco smoke, which was unusual for her. A couple of times, Oliver and Thomas wanted to figure out where she was going, but as soon as they asked an extra question, their mother broke into a scream, accusing them of minding their own business and acting like little kids. We tried calling you several times, but you either had a meeting, were asleep, or your phone was turned off, Oliver said guiltily. And when they finally managed to get through, they were already on the verge themselves. Mom became completely different. Listening to his son, Greg felt pain and frustration growing in his soul at himself for not being there, and also at Katie, who seemed to go into all serious troubles without any explanation. When Oliver finished, Greg went up to the second floor. The door to their bedroom was slightly open. He walked in and saw Katie lying on the bed on top of the blanket. She turned around, hearing his steps, and her eyes widened. Greg, you were supposed to be on a business trip, she whispered, sitting down. Her hair was tousled, her makeup had apparently been hastily washed off, and her face showed signs of a recent hectic pastime. Yes, Greg answered, trying to stay calm, but our sons called me. They said that their mother behaves strangely and disappears at night. I had to come in person. Katie looked down. I didn't think it was so serious. Seriously, Greg burst out. He still couldn't stand the calm intonation. You go out at night, leave the guys alone, bring home your girlfriend, whom you haven't seen for more than 20 years. It all looks like you decided to forget about your family completely. She sighed and, without looking him in the eyes, said, I'm just tired of sitting alone. You are always on your business trips and work. The boys have grown up. They have their own lives. I found myself alone in the house and realized that I missed the old days. Old times? Greg felt everything turn inside him. Are you talking about those stupid parties Jessica dragged you to? Katie grimaced slightly. Yes, it's possible. I lacked drive. I lacked the feeling that I was alive. Jessica appeared and said, Kat, when was the last time you really relaxed? And I started going out with her. And drink until the morning. Coming back drunk so our kids are scared. Greg, she covered her face with her hands. I was wrong, I know, but I didn't want to hurt the boys. What about me? He asked almost in a whisper, but the words sounded harsher than a scream. Katie remained silent, only sighing quietly. Her face expressed despair, but Greg did not see any readiness to repent. There was a feeling that she was confused, but did not want to build bridges now. Rather, she wanted to continue her suddenly different lifestyle. Greg left the bedroom, unable to bear the intensity of his emotions. Everything was seething in his soul, from resentment to anger at his wife, and at this damn Jessica, who suddenly appeared and broke their measured life. Oliver was waiting for him in the living room again. The guy was sitting at the table, staring into a mug of coffee, and looked up when his father entered. "Well?" he asked. "Have you talked to her?" "I talked," Greg said dully. "And what did she say?" "She says she's tired of the routine. Can you imagine? Everything that we considered our joint achievement, home, family, measured life, turned out to be a boring routine for her." Oliver smiled bitterly. "Dad, did you know that she has someone?" Greg felt his heart clench in a treacherous spasm. "What do you mean, someone?" "A man," Oliver said quietly. "I heard her talking on the phone. She said the phrase, 'I felt so good with you yesterday.' She obviously didn't discuss this with Jessica." Greg was speechless for a moment. Until now, oddly enough, he did not want to believe that things could come to betrayal. He thought Katie was just indulging in nightly outings to unwind. But for her to have a lover. "You are sure?" he squeezed out. "Yes." A man's voice, she laughed, said that she wanted to meet him again. A painful silence reigned in the living room. Greg sat down on the sofa, his head heavily in his hands. It seemed to him that the world around him was collapsing like a house of cards. Everything he believed in, everything he considered unshakable, suddenly came into question. The minutes passed endlessly. Oliver sat silently next to him, listening to his father's breathing. Finally, Greg stood up, as if overcoming internal paralysis. "We'll have to find out." He headed back to the bedroom and found Katie nervously smoking on the balcony. The cigarette is another fact that shocked Greg. After all, she quit smoking at university and then never picked up a cigarette. But now, it seems, the principles have been abandoned. "Katie," he began, trying to speak calmly, "answer me honestly. Do you have a man, besides these outings with Jessica?" She shuddered and slowly turned to face him. The cigarette trembled in her hand, and instead of trying to deny, she just remained silent for a couple of seconds and then exhaled. "Yes, Greg, I allowed this." He felt like everything inside was breaking off. It's like someone pulled the floor out from under his feet and he's falling into a bottomless pit. "How long ago?" Greg asked. His voice was extremely cold and even, although a hurricane was raging inside. "Not too long ago," she admitted quietly. "We crossed paths a couple of times at the club. He courted me, and at some point I gave in." "Who is he?" Greg didn't recognize himself when he asked such questions. Katie hesitated, as if she didn't want to say a name. Her eyes were shining with tears, but she did not cry. Finally, she said, "His name is Vic. He's connected to the club Jessica takes me to. A musician, it seems, or a DJ." Greg smiled bitterly, feeling a wave of humiliation pass through his body. How petty and vulgar. His wife, the mother of 2 sons, in her early 40s, is crazy about some nightclub DJ. "You see," she continued, looking into his eyes, "I know that this sounds creepy, but with him I felt like I was 18 again. This is all crazy, I understand." "Yes, crazy," Greg agreed sharply. "And this madness seems to have destroyed our family." He did not ask further questions. He was afraid that he would not be able to stand it and would break down. Turning around, Greg left the room. Tears choked him, but he could not allow himself to cry in front of her. He must retain at least a shred of pride and clarity of thought. Oliver was waiting for him on the first floor with a worried look. "Dad." "She confirmed," Greg said shortly. "She has a lover." "Damn." Oliver clenched his fists. "What will happen now?" "I don't know, son. But obviously we all have to make a decision. Now I'm in such a state that I'm ready to give up everything and leave. But what about you, Thomas?" "We can handle it," Oliver replied. "But Dad, I can't stay under the same roof with Mom, knowing that she does this." Greg nodded, feeling pain throbbing in his chest. He looked at his watch. There were still 4 hours left before Thomas returned, and he will have to explain everything again. In the evening, when Thomas returned from his tests, a suffocating silence reigned in the house. Katie sat in the living room, nervously leafing through magazines, but it was clear that she was not reading, but simply creating the appearance of studying. Oliver locked himself in his room, and Greg sat in his office, pretending to sort out work mail. He couldn't really concentrate on anything. Every message on the screen blurred before my eyes. When Thomas entered the house, he immediately felt tension. I looked at my father. He looked like a man beaten by life, 10 years older than in the morning. I looked at my mother. She tried to smile, but it was forced and unconvincing. "Hey, what's going on?" Thomas asked quietly, not daring to raise his voice. Oliver looked out from behind the door and motioned for his brother to come here. Thomas followed him, and already in Oliver's room, he heard a brief summary of what happened. Thomas turned pale, his eyes darting, like a man trying to comprehend what he heard. "So Mom cheated on Dad?" he asked quietly, as if he couldn't believe his ears. "Yes," Oliver nodded curtly. She admitted it herself. Thomas exhaled as if someone had punched him in the stomach. For him, his mother was always a model of fidelity and homeliness. He remembered how she would read them bedtime stories, how she would comfort them when she and Oliver had a fight, how she would make pancakes on Sundays. And suddenly it turns out that all this family warmth is under threat because of her sudden desire to feel younger. "So what now?" he asked his brother. "Dad said he would look into it. But frankly, I don't see how anything can be fixed here," Oliver muttered. "Mom seems like she doesn't really want to return everything." A few minutes later, Thomas decided to go out and talk to his mother. He found her in the kitchen, where she stood leaning against the table, looking at one point. He felt sorry for her because she also looked unhappy, even though she herself was the source of all the problems. "Mom," he called quietly, "will you tell me what happened?" Katie shuddered and turned to him. There were tears in her eyes. "Tom, I'm really sorry," she said, "but I can't explain all this so that you will forgive me." "Try," Thomas replied. "At least we'll understand what's in your head." She ran her hand over her forehead as if wiping away the tension. "You see, when you grew up, when Greg began to constantly leave, I felt that. I was left alone in a big house where my whole life had been reduced to everyday affairs. I began to feel like I was just a function. I prepare breakfast in the morning, clean in the afternoon, and wait for my husband in the evening. And nothing more, no development, no joy. So you decided to find joy in the arms of another man?" Thomas asked bitterly. Katie sighed, her eyes dimming. "I understand how disgusting this sounds, but everything happened spontaneously. I was on the verge of an emotional breakdown when Jessica showed up and told me I needed to give myself a chance at life." "Mom," Thomas involuntarily shrugged. "What did you do in life? Are you happy now?" She remained silent, and he realized that no, she did not look happy. She looked confused, guilty, caught between her desires and her family's reproaches. At that moment, Greg walked in, and Katie pursed her lips silently. She seemed to be waiting for him to say something, but Greg just walked to the sink, poured himself a glass of water, and after taking a sip, turned to his wife. "We need to decide how we will live further," he announced. She nodded, pressing her hands to her chest. "I understand." "Okay." Greg put the glass down. "Then tell me what you want for yourself. Do you want to save our family and marriage?" Katie swallowed, looking at Thomas as if seeking his support. But the son, although standing nearby, looked distant. Finally, she answered something that made Greg go cold. "I don't know. Part of me wants everything back to the way it was. But the other part can't give up the feeling of freedom that I experienced." "Freedom?" Greg nodded, as if to himself. "I've heard this word many times today." "You see, Greg," Katie said with a shiver, "I'm not sure I can go back to the old Katie who sits at home and looks after everyone." Thomas, hearing these words, lowered his eyes. Greg felt a sharp pang of pain, but with the last of his strength, he remained restrained. So you choose this new life of yours, with night parties, cigarettes, and a lover. I'm not saying it's perfect, she muttered, but I don't want to be a house doll again. A pet doll. Greg smiled bitterly. Okay, the choice is made. Oliver entered the kitchen and looked at his mother with obvious hostility. Katie couldn't stand his gaze. I. She began, but he silently walked towards the sink, turning away from her. I don't know what else to say, Katie whispered, looking around everyone. Suddenly, the sound of a car was heard outside the window. Greg went to the window and saw the same red convertible. His heart skipped a beat. This Jessica again, he thought with hatred. And he was right. A few moments later, the door to the house swung open, and Jessica Lane floated into the living room, loud and self-confident, looking around at everyone with a sneer. Hello, hello, family, she sang. Well, how is the drama developing there? Greg felt himself clenching his fists. He understood that if he didn't pull himself together now, he would simply throw this woman away. But Katie, seeing her friend, tensed and at the same time seemed to gain support. Come on, Kat, stop sitting, Jessica said. Let's go, let's change the scenery, have something to drink. Are you kidding? Greg interjected, turning to Jessica. Here, by the way, the fate of the family is being decided, and you burst in and call her to drink something. What is there to decide? Jessica sighed dramatically, throwing up her hands theatrically. You, Greg, don't understand that Katie is not just a housewife. She has her own life, her own desires. Did you think that she would always obey you and live by your rules because you are a reliable husband? Greg couldn't believe his ears. He wanted to object, but suddenly Katie spoke. She's kind of right, Greg. I also want something new. I don't know if I can return to my old life. Thomas and Oliver exchanged glances as if to say, this is the point of no return. Greg was silent for a few seconds and then said decisively, Okay, Katie, if you really want to live this life, go for it. I'm not going to keep a man who dreams of everything but his family. Katie blushed and gave him a look of confused pain. She herself might have been scared to realize what it had all come to. But pride, resentment, and Jessica's presence pushed her to a more decisive step. Maybe it's for the best, she said, drawing out her words. I'll stay with Jessica for now, and there I will decide what to do next. Jessica smiled contentedly, like a predator smelling blood. Great idea, friend. I have a spare room in the house. Let's live like in the good old days. Thomas's face showed a mixture of horror and indignation. Mom, what? What do you mean, the good old days? You're not 17 years old. You have 2 adult sons, a house, a husband. We'll talk to you later, Tom, Katie answered evasively. Her voice trembled, but she tried to hold on. She walked past him, avoiding his touch, and went upstairs to pack her things. Greg remained where he was, feeling as if something was fading from him. The family, which seemed so tightly knit, was collapsing literally before his eyes. Half an hour later, Katie came downstairs with a small suitcase. Apparently, she took the most necessary things. She didn't look her husband or her sons in the eyes. She just said briefly, I'll call. Jessica, standing on the porch, smiled brightly all this time, as if enjoying someone else's collapse. When the women got out, the car door slammed and the convertible took off. Thomas and Oliver froze, each immersed in their own feelings. Oliver spoke first. It's over, right? Greg ran his hand through his hair, not knowing what to say. He couldn't believe that Katie had left, chosen this dubious life. But the facts spoke for themselves. She packed up and left. Sons, he finally said, looking at them bitterly, I don't know what will happen next. But one thing I can say for sure is that I will not leave you. We will live together, the 3 of us, as it happens, until she sorts it out in her head. Thomas walked up to his father and hugged him. Oliver did the same. This family hug was painful, but at the same time it meant a lot. They were still together, they could support each other, despite the betrayal of one loved one. Greg's heart was empty, but at the same time, Somewhere deep down, a dark feeling arose, something between a thirst for justice and revenge. He felt humiliation and anger. He understood that he could not just let go of his wife, who betrayed his love and destroyed the family structure. No matter how hard he tried to think rationally now, the idea of revenge was already brewing inside him subtly, cunningly, so that Katie and Jessica and that mysterious Vic would feel the full weight of the consequences of their actions. But for now, he knew one thing. He had to pull himself together. We must take care of our sons and protect them from even greater shocks. Almost a month has passed since Katie left home. Throughout this period, Greg and the guys lived as if on autopilot. The boys focused on preparing for college final tests, choosing schools, filling out forms. Greg tried his best to be a support for them, taking care of all everyday issues. Sometimes he felt confused. Over 20 years of marriage, Katie did many things: bought groceries, kept order, took care of bills and household details. Now it all falls on Greg. But he didn't complain. Routine became his salvation. Greg contacted his supervisor, Michael Rivera, and explained that family issues prevented him from returning to the site. Michael, although he grumbled, allowed Greg to work remotely. Sometimes Greg recalled that he had once passionately dreamed of working remotely in order to be closer to his family, but now the irony of fate was obvious. The family collapsed, and his entire presence at home was a reminder of what he had lost. He practically did not communicate with Katie. She called Thomas a couple of times, asking how they were doing. He answered dryly that everything was fine and was not in the mood for conversation. Oliver didn't want to pick up the phone at all if his mother called. She wrote to Greg only once, a short message. Sorry that this happened, and he did not answer. Indignation and bitterness seethed in his soul, and every mention of their past caused pain. But along with the pain, another feeling grew stronger: the desire to get to the bottom of the truth and establish justice in our own way. Greg was not a man accustomed to revenge. But here everything looked different. His wife not only cheated on him, she undermined her son's faith in family and moral values, chose dubious people, and got involved in the life of nightclubs. Yes, everyone has the right to make mistakes, but Greg also has the right not to leave it just like that. One evening, after the guys had already gone to bed, Greg was sitting at the computer and, looking at the photo of Katie and the children on the desktop, he caught himself thinking, I want her to understand what she lost. But I want this to be not just a separation, but an awareness of the full gravity of my betrayal. He began to go through options on how to sober up her. Officially file for divorce. This is too simple and could be a logical ending, but some inner voice said that he was not ready to sign the papers like that. Drop everything and not communicate. This is also not an option, because the sons should not suffer, and Katie will still remain their mother. Greg remembered Jessica's face, her smug smile and mocking look. She clearly dragged Katie through all the troubles and probably had a strong influence on her friend. And then there was this Vic, a lover about whom Greg knew almost nothing. The man from the club who apparently charmed Katie and made her forget about her. The next day, he sat down at the computer and started searching. During his university days, Greg was quite good at searching for information, and while working as an engineer, he was often faced with the tasks of collecting and analyzing data. Now he decided to use these skills. On Katie's social networks, he found Jessica's page, since she was a fairly public person and loved to post photos from parties. After looking through her profile, Greg found several recent posts from the Night Out Club, where the woman was having fun with Katie and some people. In the comments, he saw that a certain DJ Vic Lights was tagged. This, apparently, is the same Vic. Clicking on the profile, Greg saw a photo of a young man with dark hair and a cheeky grin. DJ, music producer, eternal party. Read the description. The pages were full of company pictures with beautiful girls, cocktails, and wild dancing. Greg scrolled through the photos with disgust, seeing how far this world was from his own. However, after carefully studying the account, he discovered something interesting. In one of the albums, Vic posted photos from parties for selected guests. There he mentioned the organizers, among whom were two names. Greg decided to record them and perhaps do some further investigation. After all, who knows, maybe these people are not so clean. Greg didn't know where these thoughts were leading, but he felt he needed to dig deeper. At the same time, he had an idea to prove to Katie herself that her new beau is not the romantic hero that she may take him for. Often behind the facade of nightclubs and bright photos lie debts, conflicts, and illegal substances. If Greg finds dirt on Vic, he can show it to Katie, or even use it in a more subtle game so that she realizes who the person is who is ruining her life. The question remained: how to get information more reliably than just from open sources, get along with someone from their circle, or hire a private detective. Both options seemed strange and dangerous to Greg, but the desire to get to the bottom of the truth was too strong. He decided to talk to an old friend, retired police officer Richard Wilkes. Richard once served in management, doing analytics and public relations. His years of service ended with an injury, and he now worked part-time in the security business. Greg dialed Richard's number. He responded hoarsely, "Hey, buddy, haven't heard from you for 100 years." And Greg, skipping the introductory pleasantries, briefly outlined the situation. His wife left. There are suspicions about her new entourage. I would like to know if this Vic is clean and what their nightclub is all about. Richard listened and replied, "Listen, Harper, this is not an easy matter. Of course, I don't promise you anything global, but I still have some connections. I can find out what kind of people these DJs and the owner of the club are if they shone somewhere in a bad context." Greg breathes a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Rich. I need any dossier, even minimal." "Understood. But keep in mind that you will have to pay for this, because I will be addressing the guys who themselves need a reward." "Money is not a problem," Greg said firmly. "Fine. Then wait for news." With this, they said goodbye. Greg hung up, feeling something like determination inside. He was not happy that he was getting involved in spy games behind his wife's back, but he believed that this way he could break this tangle of lies. After all, sometimes people who decide to tickle their nerves in the dark areas of nightlife do not understand what they are getting into. Thus was born the plan, or rather the first step towards it. Greg wasn't sure where this would lead, but he felt he couldn't stay idle. A few more days passed. Greg was waiting for a call from Richard, while simultaneously leading his quiet life as a father and guardian of the home. Strangely, the forced role of householder seemed to him not as burdensome as at first. He found himself feeling satisfied when he personally cooked dinner or put things in order, perhaps as a way to fill the emptiness and heal the wounds. However, neighbors, friends, and acquaintances had already begun to notice that something was wrong in the Harper family. Someone cautiously asked, "Where is Katie? We haven't seen her in the supermarket or on walks for a long time." Greg had to come up with excuses. She was temporarily visiting relatives, or she was busy with her own affairs. He didn't want to wash his dirty laundry in public, but he understood that sooner or later the truth would come out. However, Katie didn't seem to care about her previous social circle. On her page on social networks, she posted new photos from clubs with hashtags like freedom, new life, no borders. Many friends wrote exclamations to her in the comments: "Wow, Kat, you have changed so much. How brave," and the like. Greg saw this. He secretly monitored her profile and only smiled bitterly. It seemed to him that everything Katie did was an attempt to escape from reality, from a midlife crisis into some kind of illusion of eternal fun. But he was also angry that she was flaunting her freedom when their sons were in pain and he himself was suffering from betrayal. One evening, when Thomas and Oliver were sitting in the living room, looking through the TV, neither of them was in a particular mood. The doorbell rang. Having opened it, Greg saw Katie herself on the threshold. She looked tired, a little haggard, without Jessica. "Hello," she said, looking down. Greg silently stepped back to let her inside. Thomas frowned when he saw his mother, and Oliver stood up and left the room without saying a word. Silence hung in the air. "I wanted to talk," Katie began. Ken? Greg nodded, gesturing for her to go into the kitchen. There, he offered her a glass of water, but she refused. She sat with her fingers clasped. How are you here? She asked awkwardly. We're managing, Greg answered briefly. Thomas? Oliver? They're going through an important period right now, getting ready for college. Everyone is stressed in their own way. Katie nodded as if to show that she understood their situation. Thomas, noticing his mother walking towards the exit, just shook his head. Oliver didn't leave the room. Greg watched his wife with a cold gaze until the door slammed shut. When she left, he found himself thinking that he felt no relief, only new irritation and memories. But inside, the decision seemed to grow even stronger. I must make sure that she reaps the fruits of her actions, so that she understands that she destroyed something priceless. Soon the phone rang. It was Richard. Greg, there's news. Your DJ Vic is not as crystal clear as he might seem. I talked to my friends. He is involved in illegal trade, and together with some friends he supplies fun to nightclubs. He was caught red-handed a couple of times, but he managed to get away with it. In general, a dubious personality. Greg even closed his eyes when he heard this. Doubts about Katie's entourage were confirmed. Do you have evidence? There is not enough evidence that would go to court. But I got hold of some reports and mentions in police reports. I can forward it, but I won't risk it by email. Shall I come to your place? Yes, of course, I will wait. Greg ended the call and walked into the kitchen, feeling that the puzzle was starting to fit. Katie, fascinated by the illusion of youth and freedom, got involved with a man who could potentially drag her into crime. But if she herself does not see this, then Greg can help her see the light and do it in such a way that the blow is sensitive. Now he had a lead to revenge to collect as much incriminating evidence as possible, wait for the right moment, and bring it all down on the heads of Katie and her lover. Perhaps then she will understand what she is losing in the pursuit of illusory happiness. Richard arrived a couple of hours later. He brought printouts with some police reports and lists of Vic's acquaintances, who also appeared in the databases. Among the names, Richard indicated some dubious entrepreneurs, owners of several nightclubs and bars. Greg Reed, wincing. Yes, it's still a great bunch, Richard commented. Look, here there is a mention that Vic was in a relationship with one girl, who later ended up in a rehabilitation clinic. I don't know how directly he is involved, but the fact is alarming. Yeah, Greg felt like he was seeing evidence of a nightmare. Did you want to show all this to your wife? Richard clarified. Be careful, there may be consequences. We'll see, Greg muttered. I want her to understand who she messed with. Richard shrugged. The main thing is not to go too deep. These people know how to be cruel if they interfere in their affairs. I'm not going to fight them, Greg lied, although he internally felt that he was ready to go far to force Katie back to reality. When Richard left, Greg carefully hid all the materials in the safe where he kept important documents. Then he sat down at the table and began to think about how to use this information. He could have just met Katie, shown her these papers, and said, "See, maybe this will make her think for a second." But knowing how much she was now under the influence of Jessica, Greg assumed that she could turn everything inside out. This is all fiction, a setup. Greg is trying to intimidate you in order to bring you back under his thumb. Then Greg came up with a more sophisticated idea. If someone anonymously reports Vic's activities to the police and they find evidence of his crimes, he will be investigated and maybe put on trial. And Katie, faced with a real scandal and the fall of the Prince Charming, may suddenly see the light. But Greg understood that this was a path on the verge of the law. He did not yet dare to act so radically. Nevertheless, a tiny germ of this idea remained in my head. Greg thought, if Vic continues to ruin Katie's life and, God forbid, drags her into something dirty, I will have to take drastic measures. And inside him, that same voice spoke, whispering that he could take revenge for the betrayal by breaking everything for which Katie sacrificed her family. With such thoughts, he went to bed, not knowing that even more reasons for action would soon appear, and that his plan would develop much more rapidly than he expected. A little more than a week has passed since Katie showed up at her home to pick up a box of old things. Greg and his sons continued to live in their new male model, getting up early, working, studying. The house became noticeably quieter and more uncomfortable than before. Instead of the usual aroma of morning pancakes and the soft voice of the mother, tense silence now reigned, sometimes diluted with short phrases about everyday affairs. Thomas and Oliver, although they remained close to their father, spoke little about their feelings. Sometimes it seemed to Greg that they were trying to pretend that everything was fine and avoid unnecessary questions. However, there was a depressing atmosphere in the air. It pained Greg to realize that they had all essentially lost their family by losing trust in the person who had once held all three together, Katie. During this time, Greg had only one short correspondence with his wife. She sent an SMS that she wanted to meet and calmly discuss the future, but Greg did not respond. Wasn't ready. He felt that he still had too much resentment and anger inside. And then he had a plan brewing much more complex and subtle than just talking. He had already received some materials on Vic from his policeman friend Richard and looked through them several times, sitting in the silence of his office in the evenings. He wanted to find the right way to show Katie what she had gotten herself into. But at the same time, Greg wanted her to experience shock and paid for the betrayal, rather than simply feeling sorry for herself or making excuses by saying that she didn't know who she was messing with. Greg wondered what would happen next. After all, the collected materials, arrest reports, mentions in police databases, all this did not amount to hard evidence. Vic somehow avoided responsibility, perhaps because he had connections or money. If Greg simply shows these papers to Katie, she, under Jessica's influence, may decide that they are fake or an attempt to intimidate. But there was another option: to pass on the evidence, or at least a tip to those who had already been interested in the activities of nightclubs more than once. The police, if they have a normal spotter, are able to organize an inspection, a search, or even operational activities. Greg did not know the legal intricacies, but he understood that Richard would be able to help if he decided to take such a step. However, before taking drastic action, Greg wanted to know something else. He felt there was not enough evidence that Vic was truly dangerous, and that Katie was risking not only the family's reputation, but also her safety. He asked Richard to help further comb the DJ's environment, and he himself began to think about how to bring to light the dirty details directly from the club where Vic works. For example, did Greg have any acquaintances who were ready to go there under the guise of clients and at the same time take a closer look at the situation? Meanwhile, Thomas and Oliver were preparing for graduation events. They talked more and more often about the future, about income. Oliver was considering a couple of universities in another state, and Thomas had almost decided that he would stay to study in his hometown. He wanted to be closer to his father, although he did not admit it out loud. Greg sadly understood that circumstances were breaking his youthful dreams. Instead of supporting a happy family where mom and dad were happy about their admission, the guys had to choose colleges against the backdrop of a family crisis. One evening, as Greg sat down on the sofa, feeling unbearably tired, his phone rang in his pocket. A name appeared on the screen: Richard Wilkes. Greg immediately picked up the phone. "Hi, Rich," he responded. "Any news?" "Yes," answered the policeman. There was tension in his voice. "I learned something. It looks like Vic is soon going to roll a large shipment of goods through one of the underground warehouses. The information is not 100%, but if it is confirmed, he will have serious problems." Greg's heart sank. Everything was becoming much more dangerous than he thought. "And what does this mean?" he asked dully. So, if someone had called the right authorities and warned, then perhaps Vic would have been caught red-handed. "This is no longer a joke." Richard fell silent, then added, "Greg, this could end badly for him and for those around him. Are you sure you want to climb?" Greg took a moment to imagine what would happen if Vic were arrested. What will Katie's reaction be? Will she understand what dirt she has let into her life? Or will he hate him when he realizes that this is not an accident? Richard, I don't know yet, he admitted, but thanks for telling me. If precise information about the time or place becomes available, I'll try to find out, Richard interrupted. But keep in mind that this is a slippery slope. If Vic or his people suspect a leak, they can begin to figure out who leaked it. Here we are not far from threats. I understand, Greg said. I'll be careful. He threw the phone away and threw his head back on the back of the sofa, closing his eyes. There was a noise in his head. What does he really want? For Katie to come back and repent? Or would she go through a strong blow and, having lost her new life, crawl back on her knees? Perhaps both. But did he have the strength to withstand all this mentally? Thoughts of revenge gave him no rest. He was not a villain, but a feeling of humiliation pressed on him from within. He once believed that their family would not be shaken by storms, but now his wife publicly posts photos with her lover and hangs out with a woman whom Greg considered Katie's bad past. Every day his determination grew stronger. Since she chose this swamp herself, let her know how smelly it is. And let her understand that Greg is not a simple, boring engineer. Thomas made an unexpected proposal. One night, when Greg was about to turn off the light in the office, his eldest son came in quiet with a tired look. "Dad, can I talk?" Of course, Greg nodded, sitting up in his chair. "Everything is fine?" Thomas came in and sat down opposite, clasping his hands in his lap. He was silent for a minute, collecting his thoughts. "I've been thinking for a long time," he began. "I know that there is now a gulf between you and Mom, but I can't hate her. It's hard, and I have a feeling that Mom herself doesn't know what she's doing. Maybe we need to help her get out of this." Greg closed his eyes, feeling his own pain react to his son's question. "Son, I'm not going to finish off my mother, if that's what you're asking. But she herself chose this path. What can we do? Try to talk. Find out what she really wants. Dad, she wasn't always like this." Thomas squeezed his fingers harder. "I still remember how caring she was, how she fussed with us, helped us do our homework. Surely that old mother still lives inside her. Maybe we can, well, at least try to find a way to her." Thomas' voice was pleading. Greg understood how much his son was reaching for hope, wanting to return his mother, who had not been broken by the sin of betrayal. But Greg himself could not so easily forget how deeply she had betrayed them. "Tom, I understand your feelings, but I'm afraid it's much more complicated. Mom didn't just get confused. She took a step that destroyed our family." "Understand. I understand," Thomas replied sadly. "But maybe, at least for her own sake, we can intervene before she gets into even bigger trouble. She seems to have a relationship with Vic. Oliver said that Vic is a shady guy." Greg nodded. He himself knew much more detailed information about Vic. "I'll think about it, Tom," he said quietly, "but promise nothing." "Okay," the son agreed. "Just know that I don't want to lose her completely." When Thomas left, Greg remained in the semi-darkness of the office. He felt two forces fighting inside him. One demanded to punish Katie, the other demanded to take pity and try to save her. But it's not a fact that she herself will appreciate it. Perhaps she perceives Greg's every move now as hostile control. The next day, unexpectedly for everyone, there was a knock on the house of another old friend. But this time it wasn't Jessica Lane, it was Michelle Hudson, a woman who went to college with Katie and with whom they once maintained a friendly relationship. Michelle moved to another city many years ago, but periodically called Katie on the phone during the holidays, and so she found herself passing through the city. Greg opened the door and froze when he saw a short, blonde woman with big green eyes. Michelle smiled politely. "Hello, Greg. Sorry for the lack of warning. Can I come in?" "Of course, come in." Greg stepped back, letting her inside. "And how long will you stay?" "No, I'm literally in the city for a couple of days on business. I decided to drop by because I heard from mutual friends that you have big problems with Katie." Greg felt a heavy heart. "So, rumors have already started." "Yes, something like that," he replied. "Sit down. Would you like coffee or tea?" "Coffee, please." Michelle nodded. Once they were settled in the kitchen, Michelle continued. I saw Katie a few days ago. She called me herself after learning that I was in town. We met in a cafe and talked. Greg, I don't want to pry into someone else's family, but the way she's acting is a nightmare. I barely recognized her. She is in some kind of nervous excitement, says that she is finally free, but looks either depressed or impudent. Yes, she has changed a lot, Greg said dully, and it looks like it's not for the better. She told me that she couldn't live with you, that you were stifling her personality. At the same time, she herself reeks of inner uncertainty, as if she herself does not understand where she is going. Michelle clenched her hands. Greg, you know her better than anyone. Is it really over? Greg looked away. It was not easy for him to admit this. I don't know yet, he said. But she left, and she has a man. And in general, this new circle of hers. Do you know where she lives now? She said she was renting a room from some friend. Maybe we're talking about Jessica. Michelle frowned. I remember that girl, loud, always dragging Katie to parties. It looks like history is repeating itself. Yes, Jessica has emerged from obscurity and is re-educating my wife. Greg grinned, but there was bitterness in his voice. What are you going to do? Greg hesitated and admitted. I have some information about Katie's lover. He is involved in illegal activities. If I want, I can make all this public, and most likely, he will report to the police. He sighed. I understand that this will be tough, but perhaps this is a way to sober up Katie, to show her what kind of mess she has gotten herself into. Michelle looked at him, her mouth parted in surprise. Are you ready to do this? I don't know, Greg answered honestly. There are times when I want revenge because she betrayed me very painfully, and there are times when I hope that she will come to her senses or that I can somehow influence her differently. Listen, didn't you think that if he went to jail, she would hate you even more, deciding that you arranged everything? I thought, Greg smiled bitterly, but maybe hatred is better than this vicious swamp. They were silent. Michelle sipped her coffee thoughtfully, then said, You know, if I can help with anything, at least talk to Katie, try to get through. Maybe she will listen to me, since her grievances about family life are not connected with me. I would be glad, Greg nodded, but I'm afraid your voice will drown in her new environment. Still worth a try, Michelle sighed. I'll call her and offer to meet again. Maybe we can start a conversation about Vic, about his murky affairs. Let's see her reaction. Thank you. Greg nodded gratefully. I will be glad to receive any help. When Michelle left, he felt something like hope, albeit faint. Perhaps meeting a more adequate friend will make Katie think again. However, Greg understood that if Katie was already deep into her taste of freedom, then Michelle's words might not work. And then the only last option left is to wait until Vic stumbles and bring down the wrath of the law on him. Meanwhile, Oliver, the more withdrawn of the twins, became increasingly distant from any memories of his mother. If Thomas was still trying to understand Katie, thinking about a compromise, then Oliver moved into a state of cold hostility. He didn't talk about his mother out loud, but Greg could see how his son was being torn apart from the inside by resentment and pain. One evening, returning from the store, Greg saw Oliver sitting on the porch of the house, his head pulled into his shoulders. He seemed to be thinking about something while looking into the sunset. Greg put the bags on the steps and sat down next to him. How are you, son? He asked quietly. Oliver shrugged. It's fine. I'm just tired. I'm finishing up some things at school before graduation, and in general my head is heavy. Greg, knowing how difficult it was for Oliver, tried to carefully broach the topic. You hardly talk to me about Mom. I would like to understand how you feel. What is there to understand, Dad? Oliver looked ahead gloomily. I'm angry. I'm trying to forget that I even have a mother. Greg felt a pang of pity. Even though Katie had slipped up, she was still the boy's mother, and Greg didn't want them to cut her out of their lives completely. You have the right to be offended, he said softly, but perhaps over time the pain will subside and you will be able to look at the situation more calmly. I don't think I can, Oliver shook his head. You see, Dad, I always believed that Mom was our reliable rear, and so she does this. I'm disgusted that she was flirting with someone at the club, and then declares that she is bored with her family. Damn this boredom. He hit his knee with his fist in anger. Greg didn't stop him, he let his son express his emotions. I don't even want her to come back, Oliver continued. Let him live better with this DJ of his. If she's interested there, then let her, and I don't want to see her face. His son's words sounded harsh, and Greg understood that Oliver's wound was deeper than Thomas's. Perhaps because Oliver was always more sensitive, although he didn't show it. Now his pain transformed into cold rage. Okay, son, I heard you, Greg answered quietly. Just know that if you ever want to talk, I'm here. And I'm not making excuses for Mom, but I'm sure that she didn't want to hurt you too. Oliver smiled wryly. Whether you wanted it or not, the result is the same. She betrayed us. Greg fell silent. The same soul-tearing question came to life inside him. Is it possible to somehow fix all this? But looking at Oliver's face, he understood that his son had his own decision. He was not ready for forgiveness or understanding. And Greg couldn't make him change his mind. Everyone dealt with betrayal in their own way. That night, Greg lay awake for a long time, turning over his thoughts. He remembered how recently he had persuaded himself to give Katie time, and now he himself had almost come to the conclusion that there would be no return to the way things were. Maybe they are destined to go through divorce. But then what about Thomas, Oliver? He asked himself once again. The sons are already adults. In a couple of months, they will go to college, leave, and the house will be completely empty. Greg will be left alone in a big empty box filled with memories. At this thought, a wave of despair came over him, followed by a familiar attack of anger. I wanted Katie to feel pain too, not because he is a sadist, but because he believed you can't just continue to calmly enjoy parties like this, having made a choice in favor of a free life and a male dealer. We must answer for our actions. So Greg developed a plan for a thorough blow against Vika. He decided to wait from Richard for exact dates on when and where the deal could be made. If an opportunity presents itself, he will take advantage of it, and then let Katie blame whoever she wants. Perhaps when she sees what she's gotten herself into, she'll think about it. A few more days later, Michelle Hudson visited Greg again. This time, she looked worried and angry. I met Katie, she said as soon as she crossed the threshold, and it was just terrible. Greg led her into the living room and invited her to sit down. What's happened? Michelle bit her lip as if trying to restrain herself. I tried to talk to her, explain that all her nightly adventures were self-deception. She said that she risks losing her family, the respect of her children. But she. What is she? Greg leaned forward, anxiously awaiting an answer. She just waved it off. Oh, Michelle, don't teach me how to live. I've lived for so many years for the sake of others. Now I want it for myself. I asked her about Vic. Are you sure this man is safe? She replied that Vic is very sweet and just makes her feel alive. And then Jessica intervened. Hearing the woman's name, Greg clenched his jaw. Yes, she was there. She took a break from her cigarette and started yelling at me. You, Michelle, don't interfere in our company with your moralizing. Katie knows what she wants. If she wants to be free, she will be. Michelle sighed heavily. She almost caused a scandal there. Katie, oddly enough, took her side. I realized that it was as if they were in some kind of alliance. Jessica pushes Katie to do drastic, reckless actions, and she stubbornly follows the lead. I guess, Greg said gloomily, Jessica has always been a provocateur. Apparently, now she has achieved her goal, she has a friend with whom it is convenient to hang out and have fun. Yes. Michelle clenched her fists in her lap. I was so outraged that I decided to leave. But finally, she told Katie that if she continued in the same spirit, it would soon be too late to fix anything. And how did she react? No way. She said, I'm a grown girl now, Michelle. I don't need a babysitter. Michelle smiled bitterly. I'm afraid she's turning a deaf ear to all the arguments. Greg closed his eyes, trying to cope with the wave of despair. So, relying on Michelle's voice of reason didn't work. Katie has finally settled into life with Jessica channeling her fun. And perhaps Vic plays a role too, fueling her self-deception. Okay, Greg said. Thank you for trying. But it looks like Katie has no intention of returning, at least for now. Yes, Michelle nodded. Are you going to do something? Greg hesitated, not knowing whether to tell Michelle about possible plans to turn over Vic. He only answered evasively. I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll give her a little more time. Michelle apparently realized that Greg didn't want to go into detail and didn't ask any more questions. She only asked, if anything happens, keep me posted. I sincerely want to help. I don't know if I can, but thank you. I'll remember, he nodded. After seeing Michelle off, Greg was left alone with conflicting feelings. Katie clearly turned a blind eye to reality, immersed in parties and a relationship with a dubious DJ. Jessica, like a catalyst, ignites the most reckless in her, calling it freedom. But Katie is 40 years old. She has 2 adult sons. Doesn't she really understand that she is destroying everything that she has been building for 20 years? Now even Michelle couldn't convince her. Well, Greg thought, apparently the time for drastic measures will soon come. After another week, Greg seemed to begin to dull the pain. He honestly went with his sons to their school events and helped prepare for final exams. Nevertheless, Katie's shadow hung over all this life. Everyone knew that she was not around. A couple of teachers who were friends with the family quietly asked Thomas and Oliver, "Is everything all right at home?" The guys just waved it off. One evening, when Greg and Oliver returned from the store and Thomas was at a friend's, the call rang, for which Greg had been waiting for several days. Richard Wilkes called to say that tomorrow Vic is going to make some kind of underground deal, transfer the product to an intermediary, and then organize a party at the Night Out Club. Perhaps this is a very opportune moment, said Richard. But Greg, do you understand the risk? Greg, feeling his insides freeze, replied, Yes, I understand. And what do you recommend? Well, there are several ways, or we will try to report anonymously to the police and they will investigate. Or if we want more accurate evidence, we need to infiltrate, film everything on camera, lure Vic into a deal, and so on. But this is for professionals. The option of infiltration is out of the question. I don't want to get involved in crime. The first method is better. An anonymous call, exact information about the place and time, and let them get out of it themselves. I got you. I can arrange this. Someone there will listen to me. Richard paused. But I'll warn you right away. If everything goes well, they'll take Vic. And if it's unsuccessful, he may figure out that he's been betrayed. Let's hope it's successful. Greg took a deep breath. Richard, do it please. Okay, the policeman agreed. Tomorrow everything will be decided. I'll call you. When the call ended, Greg felt his hands shaking. Here it is, he put everything on the line. If the police operation is successful, Vic will be detained. And Katie will come face to face with the realization that her boyfriend is a criminal. What then? Will she return to Greg with remorse, or will she blame him for ruining her new life? Greg forced himself to think that everything is for the best. It is better to break and burn bridges than to drag out this pathetic semblance of family relationships. If Katie comes to her senses, they will talk. If not, then he will put an end to it, file for divorce, and move on with his life, no matter how difficult this path may be. Greg walked on pins and needles all Saturday. He didn't say anything to his sons, he just felt an unprecedented tension. Oliver asked why his father was so nervous, but Greg laughed it off, saying it was work matters. Evening came. It so happened that Thomas went to see a friend, and Oliver stayed at home at the computer. Greg, unable to find a place for himself, pretended to go for a short jog. In fact, he wanted to retire to wait for a call from Richard. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, A familiar number appeared on his mobile phone. "Greg," came Richard's voice. "It looks like things didn't go quite according to plan. Vic was not caught. Some kind of leak was triggered, or he sensed something was wrong." Damn. Greg's heart sank. So nothing worked out. Well, the group left, but when they arrived, they didn't find anyone there. Apparently, Vic either rescheduled the deal or canceled it altogether. He smelled something. "Oh crap," Greg muttered. "So it's all in vain." "Not really. There is a chance that he will still conduct the transaction in another place or time. My friends will try to find out. But for now, alas, he escaped the raid." Greg felt anger and relief fighting inside him. On the one hand, he longed for Vic to be caught, but on the other hand, maybe it was for the best that there was no scandal that night. In any case, the plan failed. "Okay," he sighed heavily. "Thank you, Rich. If you find out that Vic is up to something again, let me know." "Fine. But be careful. If he suspects that he has been betrayed, he may start looking for rats. What if someone blurts out that you were interested in them?" "I'll try not to glow," Greg muttered. "See you later." He ended the conversation and, staring at the dark sky, felt a surge of disappointment. It was as if all his determination, all his accumulated anger and determination to finish the job had all been in vain. Vic slipped away. Katie will continue to date him, not knowing that he almost went to prison, and Greg will still be left with resentment and dirty information that did not serve anything. Returning home, he saw Oliver eating dinner at the table with headphones on. The son glanced at his father. "Everything is fine." "Yes," Greg lied. "I just went for a run and was tired." "You're kind of pale. Maybe he caught a cold," Oliver asked, taking off one earphone. "A little," Greg waved it off. "I'll go take a shower and go to bed." All night he was tormented by nightmares. He dreamed that Katie was laughing in a smoky nightclub, holding Vic's hand, and Greg was trying to shout to her, but his voice was drowned in the music and Jessica's laughter. He woke up in a cold sweat and for a long time could not fall asleep again. Nearby in the house everything was quiet, and only my own heart was pounding loudly in my ears. Several days passed. It seemed to Greg that everything was going downhill. The plan had failed, the relationship with Katie remained at zero, and the sons were withdrawing into themselves. But suddenly, on Tuesday evening, Greg was sitting at his work laptop, checking drawings, when his phone rang. The name appears on the display, Katie. Greg winced. This was the first time she had called him directly in weeks. "Hello?" he said tensely. "Greg." Her voice sounded hoarse, as if she had been crying or was very scared. "Sorry to bother you. Can I come?" He couldn't believe his ears. "Does she want to come?" "What's happened?" he asked carefully. "Are you okay?" "No," Katie answered, and tears were clearly heard in her voice. Everything is very bad. Sorry to call, but there's no one else to go to. Can I?" Greg was silent for a moment, then said dully, "Come if you want. Okay? I'll be there soon." The call ended. Greg remained seated, clutching the phone, feeling his heart beating like an alarm. What happened when she suddenly decided to take this step? He told his sons that Katie was on her way, but before he could go into detail, Thomas and Oliver exchanged puzzled glances. Oliver cursed quietly under his breath. What else was missing, but didn't say anything out loud? Thomas looked tense, but seemed ready to talk. About 40 minutes passed before footsteps were heard at the porch. Greg opened the door and saw his wife. She looked really bad. Her hair was disheveled, there were dark circles under her eyes, she was trembling. Before he had time to ask what happened, she saw him, covered her face with her hands and sobbed. "Katie," he called quietly. "Come in." She entered and dropped her bag heavily. Thomas appeared in the hallway, frozen, looking at his mother with regret and concern. Oliver, on the contrary, did not come out, remaining in the living room. Greg motioned that they should sit in the kitchen. Katie sat down at the table, barely looking up. Thomas hesitated and sat down next to him, but was ready to move away at any moment. Greg is the opposite. There was an eerie silence. Finally, Katie began to speak with anguish. Sorry that I come in this form. I just have nowhere else to go. Jessica kicked me out. We had a terrible fight, and with Vic. Here her voice broke, her eyes filled with tears. Everything is bad with Vic, too. Did you quarrel? Greg frowned. What do you mean, kicked me out? Yes, Katie sobbed. Jessica and I had a fight. It turns out she has her own problems there. Some new girlfriends. She brought them into the house, and I suddenly realized that complete chaos was going on there drinking, something else. I tried to object, and she shouted, "This is my house. If you don't like it, get out." She threw my bag out the door. In general, I was left homeless. And Vic, God, I don't even understand how I got in touch with him. He disappears and doesn't answer calls. I suspect he's in trouble with the law. She suddenly looked straight at Greg. He became suspicious. I saw in his things. I tried to ask what it was, but he yelled that it was none of your business and hit me again. Hit. Thomas and Greg screamed in unison. Yes, Katie whispered, covering her face with her hands. Not much, but it was terrible. I realized that he was not at all the nice person that he pretended to be. Then he left, said that it was time to take care of business, and blocked me on his phone. I didn't know where to go, and so. She burst into tears, her whole body shaking. Greg looked at her, filled with contradictions. On the one hand, he felt sorry for her in such a humiliated state. On the other, he could not get rid of the feeling. You chose this, Katie. You yourself left your family for such a life. Thomas pursed his lips, apparently worried about his mother, despite everything that had happened. He leaned towards her. Mom, why did you even contact this Vic? I'm a fool, she said in a whisper, sobbing. I was bored. I wanted new sensations. Jessica turned me on, and Vic knows how to be charming when it suits him. I just lost my head. There was silence, and then Greg asked, What do you want now, Katie? She looked up at him with tear-stained eyes. I don't know. I understand that I did the wrong thing, but I am now in such a state that I have nowhere to live. I don't have any money because I only took cash with me, and my cards were all left in the house. Can I stay here for a couple of days? She said it timidly, as if she was afraid Greg would kick her out. Thomas looked at his father, biting his lip. It was clear that he was hesitating. On the one hand, his mother was in trouble. On the other, just yesterday she acted as if they didn't need her. Greg exhaled slowly, trying to comprehend everything. Katie looks pitiful and confused. If you kick her out, this is the final break. But will he be able to let back his wife, who until the last day preferred someone else's bed? The answer suggested itself. As a person, he couldn't leave her on the street, especially in this condition. The question is what happens next. Okay, he said finally, you can stay for a couple of days, but then we will have to talk seriously about future plans. Thanks, Greg, Katie said with relief. I promise I won't interfere. I just need to come to my senses. Greg glanced at his son. Thomas nodded, indicating that he agreed. Oliver, as it turned out, had been standing in the doorway all this time. When he saw his mother, he only frowned, said nothing, and quickly left. So Katie again found herself under the family roof, but now in the status of an uninvited guest seeking temporary shelter. Greg settled her in the guest room, offered her clean linen and food. She thanked him, not daring to raise her eyes. Her mood fluctuated between fear and relief. It was clear that she herself did not believe how quickly her illusions about the new life collapsed. When everyone had gone to bed, Greg sat in silence for a long time. In the house was Katie, his wife, whom he now felt was a strange woman. Emotions were seething in him. Pity, indignation, and some satisfaction. Serves you right, since you've come to your senses, maybe you'll understand what you've done. But at the same time he understood. Difficult conversations awaited them ahead, and it was not at all a fact that Katie was ready for repentance, and he was ready for forgiveness. The first morning after Katie returned was tense. Greg got up early to make breakfast for himself and his sons. He usually made coffee, scrambled eggs, or toast. Today, he found Katie in the kitchen. She was sitting in her old robe, with a dull look. When she saw Greg, she quickly looked away. "Good morning," she muttered. "Morning," Greg responded dryly. "How did you sleep?" "So," Katie shrugged. "Too many thoughts." Greg set up the coffee maker and poured in freshly ground beans. He wasn't sure if he wanted to have breakfast with her like in the old days. My heart ached from the memories. Not even a few minutes had passed before Thomas came into the kitchen. Seeing his mother, he nodded. "Hello, Mom." "Hi, Tom." Katie smiled guiltily. "How are you?" "Fine. Today we have a graduation ceremony rehearsal at school," he explained, a little stiffly. "Then go home in the evening." "I see." Katie sighed, looking out the window. "Listen, maybe I could come to your graduation, if you don't mind. After all, this is an important day." Thomas hesitated. It was clear that it was difficult for him to refuse, although he was not ready to completely forgive. Finally, he muffled, "I don't know, Mom. Let's see. In the end, Dad will definitely be there, and if you really want, you can come. I don't mind." "Thank you," Katie whispered, looking down. At that moment, the door burst open and Oliver appeared in the kitchen. When he saw his mother, he grimaced, but did not say hello. He walked up to the table and took a glass. Greg felt the atmosphere heating up. "Son," Katie began, but he interrupted. "Don't call me that." He turned to her, anger flashing in his eyes. "You deprived yourself of the right to call me that." There was dead silence in the room. Katie turned pale and Thomas and Greg exchanged glances. Finally, Greg said quietly, "Oliver, calm down." "No, Dad, I don't want to calm down," the guy snapped. "I already kept everything to myself. And now I see her here, as if nothing had happened." "I understand how you feel," Katie said plaintively. "You don't understand anything," Oliver snapped, slamming his glass on the table so that water splashed. "You preferred some idiot, and now that he dumped you, you came back, like, save me, aren't you ashamed?" "Oliver." Thomas tried to stop him, but he was furious. "Shut up, Tom. I want her to hear what she is like." "What she is." He could not squeeze out the right words, choking with anger. "For 20 years, we considered her the best mother in the world, but she spat on us and left like a selfish person. And now she's coming back because she has no money and no roof, hopes that we will forgive everything. No thanks." Katie burst into tears, unable to withstand the onslaught of her son. Greg looked at this scene with mixed feelings. His pity for Katie struggled with the knowledge that Oliver simply could not contain his resentment. Finally, Greg said harshly, "Oliver, that's enough. I understand everything, but we don't need screams. You have school, it's time for you to go. Go." The guy was breathing heavily, clenching his fists. He turned away from his mother, grabbed his backpack, and ran out of the kitchen. Soon the front door slammed. Thomas quickly took a sip of coffee and, throwing an awkward bye, also followed his brother out. That left Greg and Katie. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Greg was simply silent for a few moments, not knowing what to say. Then he whispered, "Sorry." He couldn't help himself. "Yes, he's right," Katie sobbed. "I deserve it all, isn't it?" Greg didn't answer right away. He just took 2 mugs out of the coffee maker. He moved one towards her. He sat down opposite, looking at his wife. More precisely, at the woman who had once been everything to him. "Tell me everything," he said finally. "What happened to Vic?" Katie shook her head, wiping away tears. At first everything was beautiful. Restaurants, night walks, and then I noticed that he likes fun. I didn't accept, he didn't insist. But he was constantly surrounded by strange people. He either has a lot of money or suddenly has none at all. He became nervous and often disappeared at night. Once I tried to ask a question, and he lost his temper, almost hitting me then. But I was still afraid to leave, because I had already quarreled with you, and Jessica said that Vic has everything under control. "Yeah," Greg smiled wryly, feeling anger and bitterness blazing inside. "And what next?" He became cold towards me. Apparently, he just liked my attention, he felt power, and when I got bored, he began to be rude. I went to Jessica, and she kicked me out a day later, so I ended up on the street. Greg, listening, understood that everything was so predictable. Another womanizer and dealer who worked off Katie when she was no longer comfortable. But he said out loud, "It's clear, and now you're back here." "Yes, but..." Katie blushed. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, and I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness. Just understand, I have nowhere to go. I don't have anyone who could take me in, and I'm tired of all this hell." She fell silent, giving him time to digest what she had said. Greg took a sip of his coffee, thinking, if he only had a desire for revenge, he would have kicked her out right now. But he's still not like that, and Thomas and Oliver, with all their pain, would hardly want to see their mother homeless on the street. "Okay," he said quietly, "you can live here, but let's get one thing straight. This is only a temporary solution so you don't end up on the street. No one said that we forgave or forgot." "I understand," she whispered. "Thank you. And one more thing," he added. "You need to start doing something with your life. Look for a job, deal with documents. I will no longer support you as before. It's better for you." Katie nodded, clutching her mug. The understanding flashed in my eyes that the paradise of a housewife, where her husband takes care of everything, is a thing of the past. "I'll try, Greg. Is it true? I have lived in a world of illusions for too long." "We'll see," he answered briefly. He got up to go take a shower and get ready for the site. He had to go to a work meeting for a while. Katie remained in the kitchen with her head down. Everything was mixed up in Greg's soul. Pity, resentment, cautious hope that maybe she had really begun to see the light. But can he forgive? And what happens if they fail to improve their relationship? All that remained was to live, checking day after day how sincere her words would be. Katie spent the next few days barely leaving the house. She tried to somehow establish contact with her sons, but ran into a wall of alienation. Oliver still looked through her. Thomas tried to act polite, but kept his distance. Greg was also in no hurry to get closer. He provided her with a minimum of funds. He filled the refrigerator, but emphasized that if she needed something additional, let her deal with the bank cards herself, which, by the way, were once issued to both spouses, and let her look for a job. Katie looked at advertisements on the internet several times and called about vacancies, but so far to no avail. Her design portfolio was too old because she had not worked for many years. One evening, she knocked on Greg's office door while he was sorting out calculations. "Can I come in?" "Come in," he answered, without taking his eyes off the monitor. She came in and sat down on a chair. She looked guilty. "Greg, I wanted to talk. I hope you're not busy." "Speak," he muttered. Katie fidgeted, clasping her hands. "I wanted to say that I realized how I betrayed you. Sons, you, our whole family. I was blinded by some rebellion within myself. I wanted to give up everything to feel young. But it turned out to be a nightmare." Greg sighed, leaning back in his chair. "And what do you want now? Ask for forgiveness?" "Yes," she frowned, "although I know that you may not accept it. But I don't know what to do other than try to atone. To atone for guilt." Greg smiled slightly bitterly. "Life is not church, Katie. There is no simple redemption here. You can only prove over time that you have changed, but I can't promise that it will be enough." She nodded, tears glistening on her eyelashes. "Understand, but I'm ready to try. What if? What if we can be a family, at least in some form?" Greg closed his eyes for a moment. Family. How he would like to go back to the past, where Katie happily prepares dinner and he comes home from work and hugs her, feeling the warmth in his soul. But now it all seemed like a broken mirror. Can it be glued, he asked himself, or will the pieces remain forever? "We'll see," he finally answered. "I don't make promises. But if you are really ready to change, you need to start with yourself. Stop blaming everyone around us. Find a job. Give our children the opportunity to at least believe that they will not have to experience betrayal again. Katie pursed her lips. Fine, I'll try. I'm already looking for options. Maybe they'll hire me to a small design office, maybe for a low position, but at least something. Greg nodded. This is right, and then life will show. She left and Greg was left thinking. He was partly relieved that Katie had realized her guilt. But damn it, it was scary to trust her. What if she succumbs to Jessica's influence again or decides that she's bored? The next day, an unpleasant episode occurred that confirmed Greg's fears. In the afternoon, when his sons were at school and Greg had left for a meeting, a familiar red convertible pulled up to the house. Jessica Lane, having learned that Katie was back at Harper's, decided to see her friend. Katie herself later spoke about this meeting in the evening. Jessica has arrived, said Katie, rubbing her hands nervously. She showed up with a bag of alcohol, laughing loudly as if nothing had happened. She said, "Well, Kat, have you decided to go back to the old bore? Of course, I tried to say that nothing is clear between you and me yet." But she only scoffed. "Ha ha, so she crawled back to him like a little dog?" "That girlfriend," Greg muttered through his teeth. "I asked her to leave because I don't want to make noise in this house. She said that you and I are going through a difficult period, that I am trying to fix something. And Katie paused. She invited me to go with her to her friend's place to have a drink and relax. Like, stop suffering, Greg already hates you anyway. She even tried to pull me out by the hand. So what are you doing?" Greg waited tensely for an answer. "I refused," Katie said quietly. "I said that I don't want this kind of life anymore." Jessica scolded me, said something like, "You'll regret this," and left. Greg felt a mixed feeling of relief and anxiety. Thank God that Katie didn't give in, but if Jessica has made it a habit to bombard her with visits, then sooner or later she may start doing it again. "Okay," Greg said. "I hope she won't be too annoying." Katie shrugged her shoulders in confusion. "I'm afraid she might do something. She's angry that I ended up turning my back on her. And Jessica knows how to be vindictive." "Let him just try," Greg said quietly, and a chill of determination flashed in his eyes. He remembered that Jessica, as Richard found out, had her own problems with the law. Noisy parties, sometimes fights, hooliganism. She's hardly a criminal personality, but who knows what she's capable of if she considers Katie a traitor to their fun life. Another week has passed. The situation gradually moved into the phase of a fragile truce. Katie stayed at Greg's house, helping with the housework, although she did everything very carefully, as if she was afraid of causing Greg or her sons to have an outburst of irritation. Thomas sometimes talked with her on abstract topics, but so far he could not forget her actions. Oliver is still cold, saying only hello and bye. Greg kept his distance, watching to see if Katie was truly changing. Suddenly, Katie's phone rang. She looked at the screen and turned pale. Greg, noticing her reaction, asked, "Who is this?" "Vic." She whispered, "I thought he blocked me." "Will you pick up the phone?" Katie hesitated, then answered, "Probably worth it. Maybe he wants to communicate something," and pressed the answer button. Greg saw how she first said hello and then immediately pressed the phone as if the interlocutor was shouting. Her face turned even whiter. I don't know what you're talking about," she muttered. "Vic, calm down. I don't." Abruptly interrupting, she took the phone from her ear and looked at Greg. Her eyes widened with fear. "He accuses me of snitching on him to the police," she whispered. "He says that he almost got in and someone gave away the information. He thinks that I am, apparently, at the same time as you." Greg's heart sank. This means that Vic finally sensed that there was an attempt to organize a raid, and now he is looking for those to blame. Greg knew full well that Katie had essentially nothing to do with this, but Vic may decide differently. "What else did he say?" Greg frowned. "He threatened. He said, 'I won't forget this.'" She shuddered, dropping the phone on the table. "Lord, what should I do?" Greg clenched his teeth. He understood that Vic could become aggressive. "First you asshole, hit my wife, And now you're making threats. Rage boiled inside him. But legally, Greg cannot present anything without catching Vic red-handed. But Vic is dangerous. He is most likely underground, surrounded by criminal connections. We'll call the police if he dares show up, Greg said dully. In the meantime, don't answer his calls, don't communicate. If he calls again, give me the phone. Katie nodded, pressing her fists to her chest. Apparently, she realized how crazy her behavior was when she got close to such a person. So Vic brought a new wave of fear into the Harper household. Katie felt driven, Greg was angry and feared for the safety of the family. The sons walked around gloomy, realizing that these were echoes of those adventures of their mother. Several days passed in tension. Katie was afraid to leave the house. Greg warned Richard that Vic might be seeking revenge. He advised them to be vigilant, to check if anyone was watching the house, if strange cars had appeared. Greg installed a security camera at the front door and in the yard and strengthened the locks. Against the backdrop of all this, in a strange way, something like union against a common enemy began to appear between Greg and Katie. They began to talk more about home, about their son's plans, about work. Katie often repeated that she was looking for a vacancy. She was ready to take on any day labor, just not to be a burden. Greg helped her regain access to the joint account by allocating a small amount for her expenses. One evening, Katie was waiting for him in the kitchen with a plate of hot dinner. He sat down tiredly at the table, and she asked quietly, "Can I have dinner with you?" "Yes," Greg answered after a pause. They ate almost in silence, but at the end Katie said, "Thank you for giving me a chance to somehow rehabilitate myself. I know I hurt, but I'm grateful you didn't throw me out on the street." Greg pushed his plate away and looked into her eyes. "Katie, I'm still not sure what I want in the future. But I am not a beast to leave the mother of my children to her own devices. Besides," he paused for a moment, "I once loved you, very much, and I can't just erase it from my memory." "Me too," she began, but the words got stuck in her throat. Then she quietly exhaled. "Greg, I know that love cannot be returned with a snap of your fingers, but I hope that you can at least not hate me." He closed his eyes. "Let's see how everything turns out. The main thing is that you don't run away again, don't rush into the next wave of drive. This will kill me completely. I don't want these adventures anymore," Katie said confidently. "I want to be with my family, no matter how difficult the situation may be." The words sounded sincere. Greg felt a small spark of hope smoldering inside him. But there was also fear. How lasting will this feeling be? Will she betray again? Either way, by the end of dinner, they were sitting a little closer to each other than in the morning. It seemed that life was beginning to get better. Katie continued to try, helped with the cleaning, prepared dinners, and offered her help to Thomas and Oliver in completing the paperwork for admission. Although Oliver was still avoiding her, Thomas was able to have more or less normal conversations with her. Greg remained reserved, but sometimes allowed himself a little warming towards his wife. And then one evening, there was a loud knock on the door again. When Greg opened it, frowning, Jessica was standing in the doorway. Bright lips, a short jacket, a look full of contempt. "Well, hello, Greg," she said, her lips curling into a grin. "Is Katie at home?" "Yes," he answered, not moving to let her pass. "What do you need from her?" "I want to say a couple of affectionate things. Or do you have a closed club here?" Greg looked at her, wondering if he should let her in at all. "I decided that it was better to let him come in than to cause a scandal on the doorstep." He stepped aside. Jessica slid inside, gave him a poisonous look, and began to call loudly. "Katai, where are you, girlfriend?" Katie came out of the living room and turned pale when she saw Jessica. "What do you want?" "Oh, how are you talking to me?" Jessica laughed. "Have you forgotten how recently you lived with me and drank at my expense? I paid you for this." Katie narrowed her eyes. "And anyway, what do you want here?" "I want to say that you are rubbish." Jessica's voice sounded loud, defiant. At first, she pretended to be free, and now she trudged to her hubby. "And I, like the last idiot, covered for you both with this Vic, and with all sorts of other parties. And then you ran away when problems started. Katie frowned. You threw me out yourself, remember? What could I do? You started whining that you need to quit, spoiling the whole atmosphere. Jessica lit a cigarette right in the hallway and blew out the smoke. And you will still claim that you did not set the police on Vic? I had nothing to do with this, Katie exclaimed. Yeah, of course. I know that one of you two or together with you decided to leave Vic. Only he, thank God, escaped in time. Now he's angry, and I'm angry at you too. Greg took a step forward, feeling it was time to stop her squealing. Listen, Jessica, you can be as angry as you want. Katie doesn't want to talk to you. Leave, or I'll call the police. Oh, the police, right? Funny. Jessica snorted. Aren't you afraid that I'll tell you how you, Greg, tried to stir up a raid on Vic? I have friends in the club. They know that the leak came from you. Greg's heart sank, but he tried to remain calm. Tell whoever you want. I, unlike you, live by the law. And if your friend Vic was selling crap, he belongs behind bars. Look how he spoke. Jessica laughed evilly. Who are you to judge? He would sit and not blather if he didn't want his wife to go out. And now you're trying to put her back in her cage? I'm returning her not to the cage, but to normal life, Greg said coldly. She doesn't listen to you anymore, so get lost. Jessica shot him an angry look, then turned her eyes to Katie. Well, girlfriend, are you still a miserable housewife? Yes, Katie said unexpectedly firmly. It's better to be a housewife than to be with you. Go away, Jess. Real hatred flashed in Jessica's eyes. She took a step towards Katie, raised her hand as if she wanted to hit. But at that moment, Thomas and Oliver, both tall guys, came out of the living room. Oliver raised his chin. It would be better if you left, he said. Although he was offended by his mother, he did not like Jessica even more. Seeing that the forces were not on her side, Jessica threw the cigarette on the floor, trampled it with her heel, and muttered through her teeth. Do you think you have found refuge? And Vic can come here too. I'll show you all more. Then she turned on her heel and quickly walked out, slamming the door so hard that the walls shook. For several seconds, the whole family stood in silence. Then Thomas exhaled. She's crazy. Yeah, Oliver whistled. Katie nodded, nervously touching the sleeve of her sweater. Sorry, it's all because of me. Greg sighed heavily. Okay, let him just try to do something. We will have enough grounds to contact the police. But Jessica is clearly pissed off, he thought. What if she decides to incite Vic or someone else from their party? On the other hand, Vic also doesn't seem to want to cross paths with Jessica if he suspects she's ditching him. This whole tangle of former friends threatened to come back to haunt us for a long time. However, it so happened that in the following days, none of them made themselves known. No one knocked on the door, called, or threatened. It seemed that the conflict had entered a latent phase. Greg and Katie continued to gently rub in on each other. One night, she quietly entered his bedroom, said that she could not sleep after Jessica's threats, and asked if she could stay nearby. Greg hesitated, but eventually allowed her to lie next to her without touching. So they spent the night feeling tension, but also some kind of warm presence. Thomas and Oliver's graduation was approaching. The days became increasingly busy with preparations for the ceremony. The boys tried on suits and discussed the future with their father. Katie tried to help too, but Oliver still kept her at a distance. Finally, Thomas, seeing this situation, suggested a family conversation. And then one evening, all four gathered in the living room. Listen, Thomas began, looking around at his father, mother, and brother. We're graduating soon. And then we leave for college. I thought that we need to somehow decide how we will live further. Greg and Katie looked at each other. Oliver frowned at the floor. It's clear that Mom has returned, Thomas continued, but it's still not clear. You will be together or not, whether we will forgive her or not. I don't know. I don't know either, Greg said quietly, but I'm ready to give it a chance. Katie nodded, looking at her sons. I'm very sorry about what happened. And even if you cannot forgive me, I will not leave you. I'll be there if you allow. Personally, Thomas, looked at his mother. I want to give you a chance. I have too many memories of you being a good mother. If you really sincerely decided to come back and no longer behave like, well, I don't want to be harsh, then I think in time I will be able to forgive. Katie's eyes moistened. Thank you, son. I will do everything so that you do not regret this decision. Now, the three of them looked at Oliver. He, feeling that everyone was waiting for his answer, sighed. You know, it still hurts me, but I see that Mom has changed over these weeks. Maybe not completely, but she behaves differently. I don't promise that I will talk to her about emotional things now, but at least I won't drive her out of the house. He met his mother's gaze and added, I'll try to give you a chance. Katie burst into tears, but these were tears of relief, not despair. Thomas patted her on the shoulder. Oliver looked away, but did not leave the room. Greg sat with his hands clasped, feeling that something like a cleansing had descended on their family. Yes, the wounds remain, but it looks like everyone is ready to try to move on with their lives together. After this conversation, the tension seemed to subside. The sons continued to prepare for graduation. Katie enthusiastically began ironing their suits, and Greg helped with paperwork. For the first time in a long time, there was a hint of an almost family atmosphere in the house. On graduation day, Thomas and Oliver, dressed in formal suits, stood in front of the mirror, straightening their ties. Katie looked at them with pride and sadness. The boys are grown up now. Greg, tying Thomas' tie, said, I'm proud of you guys. No matter how life turns out, remember, you can always rely on each other and on me. Katie added quietly, me too, if you see fit. Oliver nodded without saying anything else. Thomas smiled at his mother. Thank you, Mom. The ceremony was solemn. When the names of the graduates were announced, Greg, Katie, and other parents clapped and took pictures. Both twins took the stage to receive their diplomas. At that moment, Katie could not hold back her tears. They were tears of pride and the realization that, despite all her mistakes, her sons had achieved their goal. Greg stood nearby, and at some point they exchanged knowing glances. After finishing, everyone went out into the schoolyard. Katie timidly asked to take a photo together. Thomas and Oliver did not object, and then that shot happened. All four of them, although not an ideal family, but still united on this important day. Greg felt a strange warmth in his soul. Perhaps all was not lost. Upon returning home, Greg and Katie were alone in the living room. The sons went to friends to celebrate their graduation. The sky outside the window was turning pink from the sunset colors, and silence reigned in the room. We've been through hell, Katie said suddenly, looking at the reflection of the setting sun. And to be honest, I still don't believe that you let me back into the house. I did this primarily for the sake of my sons, Greg admitted frankly. But now I understand that it's not only that. There's still a part of me. He paused. In short, we have many unresolved issues. I don't know if we will be husband and wife again like before. Maybe we'll just live like neighbors until the guys go off to college. And then we'll see. Katie nodded. I understand, and I won't push. But know that if you suddenly want to try to return intimacy, I will try to prove that I will not cause you more pain. Greg looked at her. In her eyes, there was a depth of remorse and piercing pain that she would obviously carry within herself for a long time. He felt a surge of sympathy. Despite everything, he didn't want her to suffer. Time will tell, he said softer than usual. They were silent for a moment, listening to the silence of the house. Somewhere in the distance, a car drove by, and the leaves rustled faintly in the yard. Greg suddenly found himself glad to feel Katie's presence again. Even if everything is complicated, she is here, nearby, and not somewhere in a club frenzy. And his heart sank with contradiction. He hated her for her betrayal and missed those old days. Well, he thought, I've already made my choice by letting her back in. Now we have to go to the end. It's been a few weeks since graduation. Thomas and Oliver were actively preparing for their departure, choosing hostels, settling formalities with enrollment. A relative truce reigned at home. Katie found a small part-time job in a design office, making sketches for the design of shop windows and premises. She received little, but she was happy with the fact that she could earn money herself. Greg worked on his engineering projects, periodically went to the office, but tried to be at home in the evenings. There were no further announcements from Vic or Jessica. Richard reported that Vic was laying low in another city, apparently afraid of new raids. Jessica also became quiet, probably losing interest after the scandal. Greg did not relax, remaining on guard, but still every day he became convinced that the danger had passed. There was a cautious friendliness in the relationship with Katie. They began drinking coffee together in the morning, sometimes discussing plans for the weekend. They slept in separate rooms, but occasionally Katie would visit Greg when she was especially anxious. One night they had a long conversation, filled with tears and memories. It was as if they were releasing the pent-up pain. After that, Greg suddenly felt some of his anger go away. He still couldn't call it forgiveness, but he wasn't eager for revenge either. The sons, seeing that their parents communicated more calmly, also began to perceive their mother somewhat softer. Oliver even agreed to go with Katie to the mall to pick out some things for college. On her way back, Katie told Greg that they had a nice chat, although cautiously, without much revelation. This was huge progress for her. The day came when the twins packed their luggage and finally left for their universities. Katie and Greg said goodbye to them on the threshold, hugged them tightly, and wished them luck. Oliver said to her for the first time since his mother's return before leaving, "Take care of yourself, okay?" Katie smiled and hugged him, tears sparkling in her eyes. Thomas patted his brother on the shoulder, and they got into their friend's car, which took them to another city. Greg and Katie stood silently for a long time, watching the car drive away. "That's it," Katie whispered, wiping away tears. "The house will now be completely empty." "Yes," Greg nodded. "We'll learn to live without them at our side." They entered the house and silence enveloped them. In this silence, the feeling suddenly intensified that there were now the two of them, two people with a difficult history. From that moment on, relations began to change. The departure of their sons, whom everyone considered the center of the family, forced Greg and Katie to look at each other with new eyes. Gradually, they began to return elements of their former life. Dinners together, discussion of the news of the day. Greg felt that he was still internally wary, but Katie treated him with such sincere care that the heart's armor began to crack. A couple of months later, Greg decided to have a serious conversation. "Listen, Katie, we've already been through so much. Maybe we'll think, how can we continue to be official? After all, technically we are still married, but I was thinking about divorce." Now, Katie, sitting next to her on the sofa, turned pale. "Do you want a divorce?" "I'm not sure." Greg ran his hand through his hair. "You just need to decide somehow. If we are moving towards restoring the family, that's one thing. If not, then honestly file for divorce and separate. I'm ready to discuss both options." Katie lowered her eyes. "I don't want to get a divorce. I understand that I have broken trust. But I still love you, Greg. Yes, it probably sounds ridiculous after all that dirt. But it's true. And if we need official therapy, a family psychologist, I will do anything." Greg looked at her and tried to feel. Does he love her now? Or does he just remember old feelings? Years spent together, good and bad, two children. He couldn't deny that part of his soul was still drawn to her, and she looked truly repentant. Is it worth destroying everything forever when there is a chance to restore it? He asked himself. "Okay," Greg said after a long pause. "I don't want to file for divorce yet. Let's try to continue living like this. But if I feel that everything is going wrong again, I won't torture both of us." "Thank you, Greg," Katie whispered, leaning closer. "I will do my best." They fell silent, looking at each other. And suddenly Greg felt a warm wave cover his heart. He reached out and gently hugged her. Katie responded with a timid movement, as if she was afraid he would back away. But Greg didn't flinch. He felt a familiar warmth rise in his chest, albeit mixed with the pain of the past. However, life went on.